In this video, we're going to be building a web app chatbot interface using JavaScript frontend and FastAPI Python backend, coded entirely with GPT-4. It also has memory and respects token limits. I'm just going to start with saying hi. And I'm going to tell it my name is, and if I ask what is my name, should remember, I forgot the question mark, but that's fine. Should remember it first, but as we continue talking with it more, if I were to say, tell me a joke, and then another one, and after that, if I ask, what is my name, I should have forgotten it by now because I've set a very small token limit just to show you that this is possible. So it never runs into a token limitation. See, it has forgotten what we have said earlier. We are going to be having 3 different versions of this interface. Let's start with taking a look at the code. We'll have 3 different versions of this interface, all of which is entirely coded with GPT-4. Let's take a start with the single Py file. So this entire app is the Python backend with FastAPI and JavaScript frontend in a single file, facilitated by FastAPI. I will run this using Unicorn. Once it starts, it says application startup complete. We should be able to just refresh this, and this is our other chat interface. This one doesn't have memory. It takes a bit to apply. Tell me a joke, but it works very well. This is a different interface written in a single file by GPT-4. The next example is where we have a main.py file with our FastAPI backend and index.html with CSS elements, and also our JavaScript inside of the HTML. So this is a pretty cool approach. We were to run this, and once our server starts, we can control-click the URL, which is served locally, and now we can just start chatting with it. This is a different format. You can stylize it any way you like. I spent the most time stylizing the final version, but this works great as well. Our final version is where we actually have the main.py file for FastAPI backend. And we have a style.css file, as well as index.html in templates, and style.css in static, along with app.js with JavaScript code in static folder. This is probably the most appropriate way of doing it. I'm by no means a web developer expert or JavaScript expert. I just follow GPT-4's instructions. But let's begin about talking about the code. Before we jump right into the code, I just want to say that I have used GPT plus access with the GPT-4 model, and I crafted a carefully engineered prompt, and I just followed the instructions. I tried to modify some things where needed, but most of the time, almost never it was necessary. I just was feeding error messages back into the GPT-4. Most of the time, it was getting things right, but sometimes not. So when things got complex, but I actually ended up learning a lot. This video is going to be probably pretty long. I don't want it to be too long. So I'm going to make a separate video about dealing with GPT-4 and how to prompt it carefully in a separate bonus video for my Patreon supporters. But we are going to be talking about the code in depth. You can copy the code from a YouTube video, but the code files also will be available for Patreon supporters. The links will be in the description. Setting up a front end and a back end for a web app can be a complex project. We have to get our starting point right. That's why I'm going to first talk about how we can leverage Miniconda or any other virtual environment creation, whatever you prefer, to create a virtual environment from scratch and do our pip installs appropriately in that environment so that we get our starting point right. I'm going to start with deactivating my current environment by typing conda deactivate. And then I'm going to create a new conda in virtual environment by saying conda create dash and then the name of my environment, FastAPI_video with Python version 3.10. Now all I have to do is click enter and follow the instructions. It's going to probably ask me yes or no question at some point. I'm going to answer it with yes. Oh, I didn't have to. I actually made a typo when writing Python. Let me correct that. See, at some point it asked me proceed. I'm going to say yes, and then it will create my virtual environment with Python 3.10. After our virtual environment is installed, we can just use this line of code. In the terminal, you can right-click to copy, select, and right-click to paste, conda activate, and the name of your environment, and you will be in that environment, FastAPI_video. Now our requirements for this video is FastAPI, Unicorn, OpenAI for sure, but GPT-4 recommended to have multi-part too, So I'm just going to go ahead and pip install these like this. You can pip install one at a time, or you can pip install multiple packages one after another in this fashion. After that, all you have to do is wait until all the packages are installed. It might take a moment. After you have successfully installed your packages, do Control-Shift-P, and when click on Python, select Interpreter, and find your virtual environment here, in this case FastAPI Video, and select it. If you don't see it, then you might have to restart your Visual Studio Code. Don't forget. And make sure to start a terminal by going into Terminal and New Terminal, and by going out to this arrow key, click to Command Prompt, and make sure you're in the right virtual environment. Now I would like to test that our old code is working in this environment. So as you see, if you pay attention to our folder structure here, I have each one of our projects, UIs, in separate folders. So for me to run them with Unicorn, then you have to be inside of that folder. And then we are currently in the main folder. So I'm going to say CD and then S. A cool trick with Visual Studio Code is that if you type in the beginning letters of the folder you want to be in, and if you click on Tab, then it will autocomplete. And if you have more than one folder starting with that letter, you can keep pressing Tab, and it will circulate over those folders. And once you're in the appropriate folder, in this case, our application where HTML file, the CSS file, JavaScript file, and the Python file are all separate, I'm going to say uvicorn::app-reload. This main is the name of your Python file in your working directory, which is main.py. Whatever your Python file name is, this has to be that. And reload, so that whenever we make a change to the files and we save them, it automatically reloads, but the browser window you have to reload yourself, but it restarts the server. Anyway, when we press this, it is going to start our Unicorn server at that particular location, but it's saying that we are importing AIO files and we don't have a module named that. We have to pip install that. Actually, we are importing it, but we are not using it. So I'm just going to comment it out. GPT-4 recommended using it, but then we weren't using it. So let's just run again. I have commented out the AIO files. I have to say my file each time. But now it's saying that Jinja 2 templates has to be installed, because when we're using static and templates, we need to have Jinja 2 templates installed to be able to do that. I usually like to do a Google search for pip install, in this case Jinja 2, and I like to go to pypy.org and get my pip install instructions from there. You don't want to pip install just anything on your computer. So I did Control-C and broke out of that server starting. And I'm going to paste this pip install Jinja here and install it into my environment. Okay, we have installed it. Let's start our app backend again. Hopefully this time. Yep. Okay, this worked. So we didn't really need the AIO files. As you can see, I've just commented out. But I just want to demonstrate that if you're running into those errors, you can fix them dynamically on the fly. So now we're just going to go to this URL by control clicking on it, and it will open up our template right here. But we have to refresh the browser window, and after that we are in our advanced chatbot and we can start talking to it. Let's make sure there's no problems. Yeah, so this is running. If this is running, I'm hoping the rest of it will run as well. I went back to the folder which is our single app.py file. Here in this case, because our app.py file, which contains all of our code, right? Everything from HTML, CSS, Python, and JavaScript. Since the name of this file is different, see, I am using Unicorn app::app-reload here in this case. And this works perfectly as well. We'll start from this example. We are doing all our necessary imports, OpenAI, some necessary imports from FastAPI, including Core's middleware, which usurps some of the security elements that your browser will have. You can read about these in detail. We're not going to talk about it. And then we are defining our OpenAI API key. It's already defining my user environment variables. If you do a search for N from your Windows search bar, edit system environment variables, and go to your environment variables, you can set a user environment variable there. Please Google this, or you have to set it in your code. I have already have mine handled. Then we define our app to be the FastAPI. Then we add our middleware with Core's middleware. As you see, we are allowing origins and credentials to be through and methods to be allowed. Here, the asterisk symbolizes we're allowing all of it. Because this is running, you probably don't want to do it in production, obviously. But since we're running it locally, we're just going around the security features of the Chrome browser that I'm using. Then we are defining a class, message input, base model to be the message string. All this code was written with GPT-4. I'm just going to do an overview. Then we are defining a post method to this address, and we are defining an async function because we are going to be awaiting something. In this case, we are not, because you cannot await OpenAI completions. You might as well just remove this, but we're just going to leave it there. So we are saying that the user message is going to be the chat input.message, which will come back to us from the browser, from the web app interface. Then we are going to create a response with GPT 3.5 Turbo using OpenAI's chat completion. And our messages will be the system, and the content will be user message. And our assistant message will be the responses, choices, 0th element, message content. Then we are returning that back to the browser. And something cool, like GPT-4, you can do this with FastAPI. So we're defining another get method here. The response class is HTML response. So what we're doing is we're defining an entire HTML document here. In the styling, CSS styling, inside of that HTML document, you can do this, right? So all the styling here is defined, and the head and in the body, the HTML elements are created, all the divs, okay? And then we are actually inputting the script right inside of here. So we are creating an async function message where we get the message input from the HTML element, right? And then we are actually getting these. And our user message is message input.value. Then we actually get that. And we actually send that to the Python backend, in this case, FastAPI. And then we are awaiting the response when the response comes back from OpenAI. And then we are appending it to the assistant message part of the stuff. And then we are just ending that script. This is pretty cool. So this gives us a basic little interface. So I just want to say that you can use these as basic templates. Okay, use whichever one you like. You can modify all the styling from the CSS code. Right, this is going to be true for all three UIs that we will be creating. You see, the code is pretty simple. You have to know a thing or two, but it's a learning experience. Anyway, like I said, all three code files will be available for download for Patreon supporters. The link will be in the description. Our second version of the UI is very similar, but this time the Python main.py file, which runs the FastAPI backend, and index.html, which includes the CSS and JavaScript, right? So the same here, we are doing our necessary import, defining our app, middleware, chat request, the call to OpenAI. Here again said you have to have your OpenAI API key defined, and now we get a response in the chat format from GPT 3.5 Turbo, otherwise known as ChatGPT API. Then we are doing the following code is for serving the index.html file. Okay, and then following code makes the chat endpoint available to the front end. And in our index.html, we have our HTML file with styling. Again, you can modify this any way you like. And in the body, we have some HTML elements along with our script. Okay, we won't go over it, but here is the code. And finally, the most important one is where our main.py file with FastAPI is separate. Our static folder holds our JavaScript along with our styles.css, okay? And our templates folder hold our index.html. So let's just take a look at this. We are doing quite a lot of imports, course middleware, static files to have our static files folders available to be able to mount them right here. And we are importing Jinja templates to be able to use our templates folder. You can read more about these, just Google them. We do need some other imports, except I have commented on AIO files. We are defining the app like we did before. See, then, but in this case, because we have several folders, we have to mount the static files and templates because we are using Jinja 2. Jinja 2 is a template engine for Python. Then we are app, because we have defined our app, we are mounting at the directory, the relative path to the directory. Static files, directory static, name static. Okay, the syntax is like that. And our templates is Jinja 2 templates, which we have imported up here. Static files we have also imported. Directory templates, okay? Then you have to, again, don't forget, define your API key. Course middleware is required to allow requests from the front end. You can read more about it. And then we add a global variable to store the conversation history. Conversation history will always begin with the system message. So this is really cool because we're going to talk about the memory application, right? So we are initializing memory state, so to speak, and then we add a constant for maximum memory tokens. Max memory tokens, I set it to 70. As GPT 3.5 Turbo, I believe, currently is at 4,096 tokens. context limit. So you will, as your conversation grows, now your prompt is starting to grow as well as this conversation history grows. So you're just going to have a way to set some maximum tokens where, because this code will stop dropping earlier messages. Just keep that in mind. You can set this to anything. I set it to a low number like 70 just for demonstration purposes. And we have a root function to render our index.html. As you see, it's a get method and HTML response. Here we are doing the templates.templates index.html. Okay. And then our chat function to handle the chat request is a post request. And then we are saying def chat API. So I don't understand some of this stuff. GPT-4, help me with this, please. You can read about it. Please Google it or chat with ChatGPT about it. User message, the body.get user message. This is probably what is returning to us from the front end. Then we are actually doing some checks. If there is no user messages required, probably we don't want an empty string sent back from us from the front end. Then we are appending to the conversation history, whatever the user message is. Then we are making an OpenAI API call with completions with the conversation history. You can probably here also specify max tokens. So you can use max memory tokens and max tokens here to create the kind of chatbot that you are desiring. Assistant message is whatever the responses object, content object is, conversation history. Then we are appending it back to the conversation history as the role, assistant message being the content. Okay. You can read more about this at the documentation for chat completions. I'll put a link in the description as well. I'll put the link to the chat completions right here from OpenAI. And then we want to remove older messages when total tokens in conversation history exceeds max memory tokens. While response usage exceeds total tokens, the response usage is returned to us in the object which the OpenAI returns, right? So when that exceeds our specified max memory tokens, we want to ensure that there are at least two messages, because otherwise we're sending back an empty string. What if there were only, essentially we don't want to remove the messages. So we want to make sure the length of conversation has some content in it. So we do a check for that. And then we actually remove, if we have enough, then we pop one of them, skip the system message at index 0, because we always want that to be the message if other messages are removed. Then we make a new API call without the removed message. And then in that case, we then use this conversation history. Otherwise, we break. So this is done with a while loop inside of our chat endpoint function. Then we return the assistant message. Okay. So this is our main.py file. Our index.html is pretty simple. It's under templates. Okay. We are defining here to link to the appropriate styles.css, the appropriate path, because we have a static folder. The path is this. And our body consists of this. And of course, we are pointing to the app.js as well. Our style.css just includes some styling written by GPT-4. Feel free to change it. You can change the colors by just scrolling over it. You have to save it. And sometimes when you change the colorings and you save and you restart your server, even then you might have to do a hard reload of your web page. Okay, you do that with Control-Shift-R. Just keep that in mind. Maybe we'll do a demonstration, but if I forget, if you change styling and you don't see the reflected, save the changes that you have made, restart your server, okay, and then make sure you do a hard reload on your web browser while doing Control-Shift-R. Anyway. Now moving on to app.js. So we are actually getting the necessary forms from the DOM, from the HTML. And then we are listening for a form submit. We want to just listen, say when the user clicks, right? Or clicks enter, get the user message. We are assigning to user message. Add the user message to the output, add the message output right here. Send only the user message. So as a response, we send the user message back to the backend. Get the assistant response. Here we are awaiting the response, and then we are adding to the output the assistant and its data, and then add a message to the chat output. So this is with a function which we are using right here, right? We are defining this function right here. So we are getting the message element, and we are appending we are making its text content as the message, whatever we have received, and we are assigning to the chat output and appending it, the message element. Okay. And we are doing some styling, I believe, here with the scroll height. So this is it. Okay, again, let's just run this real quick. We just have to change this to main. And we do have to make sure. So let's just test this. So I am in the wrong directory. I'm in the single file directory. I'm going to back out of it with cd dot. I want to be in the separate files. I'm going to do cds and then tab. Terminal will autocomplete, and then I am going to then go back to unicorn. You can do the up arrow key to bring back and cycle through your old commands that you have used. Now we're going to do main, because that's our Python file with FastAPI. And when it is done, we can go back and restart, and here is our chatbot with memory. Okay, lastly, let me just demonstrate. So what if we wanted to change the styling? Okay, let's come here. Let's see. I'm just going to do a drastic change. I want to change the chat container background color to, let's say, red. Okay, now I've changed it. And I'm going to save this file. And I'm going to go back to main.py file, and I'm going to do Control S so our server restarts, because this is only detecting the changes in the main.py file, because it treats our other files as static. Now when we go back, nothing happened. If we refresh, again nothing happens. In this case, we have to kind of do a hard reload control. This was difficult maybe. It was a bit complex, but there was a lot in it. I hope you learned quite a lot from this. I am a little bit murky with JavaScript myself, but I tried to be as informative as possible. Like I said, most of the code, all of the code essentially was written with GPT-4. I'm going to make another bonus video for Patreon supporters on how I did it, what I did with the responses, how I used it in Visual Studio Code. If you want to learn all of that, the link will be in the description. Check it out. Also, all the code files for all three of the implementations will be available for Patreon supporters. They will be in the description as well. I hope you enjoyed this, and see you in the next one. Take care.